All right, you guys. So there's a number that is inside your practice management system right now that nobody on your team is probably even looking at. And it's not your new patient volume. It's not your overhead. And it's the number of patients who came in, saw the physician, and then never came back. And in most independent practices, that number is in the thousands. And every month it grows. And nobody has ever attached a dollar figure to it. And that is what this episode is all about. So I'm Dee Nott. I'm a positioning and messaging strategist and a founding partner of Practice Growth Alliance. With me today are Frank Martin, who brings 30 years of medical industry executive experience, Quintin Gunn, our practice development specialist, who has spent decades working on what happens after the patient makes contact with the practice. Today, we're talking about something that does not get discussed as a revenue problem because most practices do not even know the number exists. So here is the argument in one sentence. You are paying full acquisition costs for a new patient. Every month, you're paying that acquisition cost, while a cheaper, higher profitable revenue source sits unused in your system. It's not a marketing problem. That's an efficiency problem. And it has a name, and we call it the accumulation problem. So you have spent 30 years inside the medical industry watching how practices manage their patient relationships. So when you look at an inactive patient list in any practice, what are you actually looking at? Like, what's in there?
Lost revenue. I mean, the big deal is not only does the practice lose revenue, they lose the chance to do what they do best, and that's make people better. Those people dropped off typically because of personal reasons. They weren't quite sold on the quality of the recovery they'd get. They were nervous about what they'd have to do. There's a whole bunch of reasons. It's interesting to note that over 30% of prescriptions that are given to patients are never filled. So it's not an unusual phenomenon for patients to go, I don't think I want to do that. So it's actually the best way to think about it operationally is having patients go dormant during the acquisition process is exactly the mirror image of having patients that you can't collect from and that sit in the 120-day file.
Mm.
Okay? It's dead cash in both cases. If you came to me and said, Frank, could you fix my accounts receivable problem for me? I have entirely too much money tied up in the 120-day file. I would say, sure, I can do that. But if we don't fix your collection problem, you're going to come back to me again in 6 months wanting me to do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a process problem.
Okay. That's a good way to put it, for sure. So is that common? I mean, do you find is that a surprising thing when you go in there and talk to a practice? Is that even like, if you bring that up, is that something that they even would recognize, even if they pulled the data?
It falls uniquely into kind of a crack because the patient's already been seen. Everybody in the practice is busy. Okay. Once the patient has been seen and the encounter has been billed for, everybody knows they have to collect that money. Okay. There's a chain of responsibility on the accounts receivable side. There is not a chain of accountability on the patient acquisition side. So if the patient drops off, it's nobody's job to make sure they understand what's happening, what did happen. It just kind of falls into that crack.
That's interesting. So Quintin, you've spent years working on what happens at the point of contact between a practice and its patients. When you look at why these patients went quiet, what are you seeing? Is it a patient problem? Is it a practice problem?
It's not the patient's problem because they initiated contact, right? So ideally they've come in through your website, through a phone call, through a doctor referral. So typically, the issue is not necessarily the patient. The patient comes in or comes to you with an expectation. They have a need. They picked you out of everyone else. And because they picked you out of everyone else, they're looking to see if the selection they made is the right one. Once they get to your office, then it's the patient. The front desk is your front line of defense. They need to be kind, up-tempo, happy, cheerful. You don't want it to be overly much, but you want it to be enough for the patient to walk away or come in thinking, this might be a nice place to be if I need services. Once that's done, then the patient will fill out all the appropriate forms, this, that, and the third. And at which point, a patient care coordinator will say, "Hello, Miss Smith. Doctor will be with you momentarily. However, there are a few things I'd like to go over with you related to what it is that you're requesting." Once they get into the patient care coordinator's office, at which point the patient care coordinator is going to be doing a series of questions. What brought you here? What is it that you're trying to fix that you thought we might be able to help you with? Have you been able to look at any of our reviews and what other patients have said about us? Was that a factor in you making a decision to come to see us? At which point you're going to get the answers to those questions. And then the patient care coordinator is going to follow up and they're going to say, "Well, before you meet Dr. Smith, let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Smith is board certified XYZ. He's been in business for XYZ number of years, and he's a featured speaker here, an authority in this area, and he's local to the neighborhood. So you're not getting someone who doesn't know the area in which we live, and he's probably treated thousands of patients like you, but each one have their own difficulty, of which he's trying to put together a patient care plan for you." So once you take them through that, all that information is taken down by the patient care coordinator.
So the patient coordinator that's basically a salesperson. That's different than the receptionist at the front desk. Is that what you're saying?
That is absolutely correct. Now, sometimes the patient care coordinator is the front desk person, depending on the size of the practice.
Okay.
Because really what you're trying to do is you're building up it's like when you go to a concert, you have the opening act first, and then the main act is the doctor. He comes in, and then, he's the star of the show. So you want to build him up, but the build up starts at the front desk.
Well, I know we kind of went off because we're really talking about just about that, reactivating a data, like a list that they have. When practices have tried to fix it, like I'm sure when is brought to their attention and they realize, I've got people in there. What do they typically do? And what works and what doesn't work? Like, what are they doing that's maybe inefficient for them?
Typically what happens is once the patient has been seen, if you don't have a immediate follow-up, Sally has come in, you've already, doctor, seen her, patient care coordinator, you've exited out, but you do want to give a timeline. And so for when we can expect them to make a decision. Most practices are not creating that expectation. And because they're not creating that expectation, what's happening is it falls to the wayside for the next opportunity. So if they don't close them that day and get a commitment like a deposit or a credit card or whatever, then typically you're just going to be chasing a lead. And if you get into the habit of chasing leads, you might call them one time, email them one time, and then they're off the list because you've got a whole litany of those through your marketing that are bringing people in over and over. So the key is, at least the reason we see practices not being successful and leads falling in the crack is because they only think if I tried to reach them twice and they didn't close when they were here, they must not be interested.
Yeah.
So they go to the back of the bus, so to speak.
Right here, because listen, I really think that this is a moment where a lot of practice owners are going to start feeling like this is a marketing conversation, and it really isn't. Here's what it actually is. You didn't lose these patients. You've just never sent them the right message. You never sent the right message to the right person at the right time. And because nobody on your team has ever pulled that number out of your system, the problem is invisible, and invisible problems don't get solved. They just get bigger. So this is where I come in. I'm working with Quintin and Frank, and I've learned so much about medical practice through them because my background is not in medical practices. It's in positioning and messaging across service-based businesses. And the pattern that I've seen across every industry I've ever worked with is in the same one that Frank and Quintin just described. So practices know something's wrong, and when they try to fix it with a message, an email, an SMS, or whatever, the message does not work because it was written before anybody understood what specific problem they were solving for each specific person. And in reactivation, that mistake is super expensive. So the unconverted lead needs a reason to start. The diagnosed patient needs a reason to schedule a procedure they already know they need, and the former patient needs a reason to return. So one message can't do all three jobs. So most reactivation attempts fail because the message was written before the segmentation was ever done. So that's a positioning failure, and that's mostly what I see. So Frank, from the intelligence side, how do you identify which segment is the highest priority for a specific practice before you start building that outreach?
Which segment of the dormant patients?
Yeah.
The best way to do it is with an online assessment. Every specialty has its own online assessment or a relatively simple and well accepted assessment tool they can use. So you want to try to find out if the patient is A, symptomatic, and B, are they bothered? Okay? And just using those two words, you can split them into 4 different groups. You can have symptomatic and bothered, which of course you want to see right away, right? You can have symptomatic and not bothered. Well, there's typically a cost to delaying treatment. If you delay treatment, it's going to get worse. Insurance companies don't like to pay it. Patients don't like to go through it. So that's a matter of education and motivation. And then you have not symptomatic but bothered. That's, you got to see them right away just because they're bothered and you want to find out what's wrong. And so that's kind of a player trade. You either figure out you're going to treat them or there's nothing that you can do and you send them on. And then the last group is not symptomatic and not bothered. And those people you just need to educate over time. They're just kind of tire kickers. You don't need to prioritize them, but you certainly need to continue to educate them. The thing that the real key to this is to try to figure out a way that you don't have to take as much of the doctor's time to provide that education. If you can do that asynchronously in a way that decreases the doctor density of the protocol, you create time for the doctor who gets really bored with giving the same lecture 15 times a week, right?
Yes.
You create more time for the doctor to do more productive tasks. So it's, to your point, Dee, just as in the AR example, if you have a high percentage of your AR in a 120-day bucket, you have a process problem. If you have a high number of people in the dormant file, okay, that have gone dormant, you have a process problem. And if you treat that like an event and not like a process, you'll fix it in the short term, but it'll come right back to get you again 6 months from now.
Right. Yeah. So Quintin, once the segment is identified, what does the actual outreach sequence look like for that highest priority group?
The first way of contact is how they contacted you, right?
Okay.
So they've come in, you've already seen them. And so now you're going to either make the phone call, Sally, it was so good to see you at our office. We learned so much about you and what you care about. So that's either a phone call or there's an email, if that's how Sally communicated with you to begin with. And you want to have segmentation for that individual because you now have a dossier or a file on what that person's issues are. So you start that communication, but you do communicate the way they started communicating with you. You want to use that communication line. If it's a phone call, use a phone call. If it's an email, use an email. But you do not want to allow so much time to go by waiting on them to get back to you about a decision that they know they need to make. So usually within a 24-hour period, that's when you need to start the process.
So before we move on to what this looks like in practice, I want to address 3 things that we hear every time this conversation comes up. And Frank, the first one is HIPAA. Practices get nervous about reaching out to inactive patients. Is this actually a compliance issue?
Yes and no. Mostly yes. If the practice is reaching out, no problems at all. Okay? It's a legitimate relationship between the patient and the practice. If the practice retains someone else to do it, as long as someone else the practice has retained is HIPAA compliant and has a business associate agreement assigned with the practice, no problems. Okay. Depending on how long these patients have been dormant, the ones we typically go after are the ones that have been dormant for at least 18 months. Okay. So if you're going to do that, it's probably best to begin that with a letter delivered by the United States Postal Service from the doctor to the patient directly, saying, just introducing the idea that we're going to try to reassess you and reestablish because we really want to help. Okay. And there's a pace at which that has to go, because what you don't want to do is send out 4,000 letters all at once and flood the front desk, because you certainly will not make a fan. So it's probably, it's 500 a week is probably the right number, because that way you can kind of keep pace. And at that rate, you won't overburden the front desk and make everybody crazy.
I call it a salesperson. Yeah,
Patient coordinator or PCC.
right. And there's definitely other things that they could do to boost that person up to, get them to be successful as well, so it doesn't flood that front desk. So that the second objection is the email blast that failed. And Quintin, you probably already spoke a little bit to this about how you use how they came in. You want to use that, but let's just say you don't have that. You need to maybe use email to start, right? And most practices have tried something and gotten nothing. So how do you explain to a practice owner what we're describing? How is that different? Why does that fail if it's just one blast that went out there instead of a segmented message?
Well, I mean, what you want to do is you want to have a system or a process that segments by procedure or service type. Because in most cases, people that are seeing you for a specific service or a specific procedure have similar concerns and issues. When you create the email follow-up, you want to address it as follow-up from your recent visit at, right? And then you want to get into it. Sally, again, thank you so much for coming to see us related to XYZ issue and concern. We want you to know we're here to help. And it looks like we spoke with you 18 months ago, but it looks like it was never resolved. Or you got to ask, did you find someone to take care of it? If not, we're still here ready to help you. But you do want to segment the email types to speak to a specific service, procedure, or issue, so that when you write it, it seems more personable.
Yeah, and I would even go beyond that. What made me think when you started talking about that was, what's the reason they didn't come in? Like, why did they stop? Why did they stop communicating? Why didn't they come in? Was there a fear that, like, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't need to do that? And would it be worth talking about that? So if it was somebody that just had something that wasn't really like pressing, I got to do this right now, I got time, like maybe that would you lead with that, or you just would, what you just described is how you would handle that?
You could also open the letter, sorry we weren't able to help you. Now, if I'm an individual on the other side and I see that title, well, who was unable to help me, right? Then you're more likely to open that, and then we can get into our discussion. Sally, the last time you visited us 18 months ago, you expressed your concern about this, and this. We're not sure if you actually saw someone because we didn't hear back from you after a few attempts, or is this something that's still a concern for you? If so, we'd love to have you come back to visit with us or to schedule an appointment. But I think if it's 18 months, you probably want to do another evaluation, because that's a long time and anything could have happened.
Yeah.
So you want to let them know, because you've come before, we can provide you a complimentary evaluation so that we know exactly where you are and see if things have changed. If they have not changed, then we can provide you an XYZ discount because you were already in our system.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of ways to go on that. And it's just a matter of really making sure that you're sequencing out who they are, getting the right message to them that's going to engage them again. And the third objection is that staff capacity. I think we've already hit on this, but practices, maybe they don't feel like, I don't have the bandwidth for that. I can't add one more thing, especially if you're at the front desk. You don't want this to come across to your doctor because, like, oh my gosh, he's going to do this and we're going to be screwed. There's going to be so many people. Is there anything else that you would suggest, Quintin, that they could maybe do to feel like, okay, this is a good idea, we need to do this?
Your staff needs to be motivated. And the number one motivator is incentive programs. So the incentive program will work in conjunction with the reactivation program, right? Mm-hmm. So for every new patient or every past patient of record or past consult that we did, which converts after 18 months, here is a stipend. You can get, if you get so many to convert, you get 2 or 3 days off. What is the incentive to motivate the staff to really focus on these people? At times doctors are not always comfortable with letting their staff know where the revenue stream is in terms of the practice. Okay. But in this particular case, the reactivation program is about spending the less amount of money to acquire a new patient, right? Because you already have them in the books. So the cost to you is lower than it would be if you're having to find new patients. So I would say creating an incentive program, at least what we found from the practices we've worked with that get those patients back in, that second visit, they're more likely to close. But your staff is going to be incentivized on the back end. Heck, if I can get 2 or 3 people a week in a month period, that's 10 new patients or 8 new patients with a dollar value of XYZ. And my bonus for that conversion is this.
It makes a lot of sense. And that is something that the practice owner really needs to look at, because that new patient acquisition, that costs significantly more per appointment, and the reactivation is absolutely something that is worth you. Like, it's a more efficient use of your staff and their capacity. Correct. So finding a way to do that would make so much sense.
And it keeps your costs low, because instead of your staff spending time trying to get information about this person, you already have that information. You're just updating it. Yeah. And then secondly, they're in your system already. Yes. They're already there. It's not a new thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I throw in a quick one here?
Absolutely, Frank.
From a systems standpoint, one of the reasons that patients don't follow through is because there's not necessarily always a firm agreement or a firm vision on what lifestyle problem the practice will be solving for the patient. Sometimes the practice will speak in doctorese and the patient is only willing to listen in patientese.
Yes.
Okay? So the doctor may think that your problem is that you've got benign prostatic hypertrophy. The patient might say that that's not my problem. My problem is I can't play golf with my friends. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's always good to get grounded in the lifestyle problem that the patient is facing, so that the practice and the patient are on the same page.
Yes, absolutely. All right, guys, before we close, I want to give you one more thing that you can do before the next episode. You can go into your practice management system, pull one report. So patients who have not had a visit or a procedure in the last 18 months, write that number down. That's the input that our calculator needs. I'm going to show you, we'll have that in the show notes, but you do not have to segment it yet. You don't even have to analyze it. Just pull that number, write it down. If your system does not make that easy to find, that in and of itself is a piece of information worth having. So we talked about the inactive patients are not a list problem. They're a revenue problem. And most practices have never looked at that number. So if you want to understand where your practice sits in the overall growth arc, the growth stage diagnostic is in the description. It's super important to go through. There's 10 questions. It takes about 3 minutes. No email required to see your result. And if you want to see what your inactive patient list is worth right now, The revenue calculator is also in that description. So put it your database size, your procedure mix, and it'll show you that number.
That's a valuable tool to get an idea of the potential revenue that you might be sitting on within your inactive patient list.
Absolutely.
And you can do projections on what the potential revenue would be if you converted 2 to 3 a week.
We have those numbers we've done it very conservatively. Just to know that when you see that number, that's a very conservative number. So just keep that in mind when you're doing that. So from Frank, Quintin, and me, I want to thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in the next episode.